Welcome back to the place we find ourselves. Today, Becky Allender and I talk about her book, Hidden in Plain Sight, which is a collection of stories designed to invite the reader to engage his or her own story in more depth. Becky shares how her relationship with her mom led to a style of relating in which she became committed to staying out of the way and becoming invisible. And Becky goes on to talk about the younger parts of ourselves that still long for our mothers and fathers, as well as the importance of experiencing, quote, here's how she puts it, sorrow in the care of wise guides as we engage our story. Sorrow in the care of wise guides. This is such a helpful book, a helpful interview if you are wanting real practical words about how to continue to engage your story in more depth. Remember that if you want to listen to episodes as soon as they are released, you need to download the Place We Find Ourselves app. Episodes will be available for free 4 weeks after they are released to the app. So if you want to support the podcast for $2.99 a month and get immediate access, instructions are on my website. Thanks so much for listening. Here's my interview with Becky. Welcome. I have with me Becky Allender. Becky, it is so good to see you.
Oh, Adam, it's so good to see you too.
So tell our listeners a little bit about you and about where you are geographically.
Well, a little bit about me. I just got back from hiking in Glacier National Park yesterday, and I live in the Pacific Northwest, a little bit a ways from Seattle, a ferry ride away on Bainbridge Island in Washington State. And we've been here for over 20 years and we're glad to be here, but we miss the sunshine in Colorado.
Yes. So we're going to talk primarily today about a book you wrote, I think it was published in 2018, called Hidden in Plain Sight. But before we get to your book, I want to just ask you some questions about story.
Okay.
So can we start by, when did you learn that you even had a story? And what prompted you to begin engaging it?
Yeah. Well, my husband, Dan Allender, has been talking about story for, I think, over 25 years. And of course, I knew that I had a story, but I heard his story more because I would hear him speaking and he would be engaging other people's story. And it was around 2006 where he was due to have a sabbatical. And it was at that time we went to New Zealand and then Europe and then an island. And especially in New Zealand, there were so many incidences where I was not even noticed. Like I remember we stayed with this one family and we'd go out for dinner or we'd just spend time with them. And nothing was directed at me. And and that prompted me to start noticing. And the more I noticed, the more I felt really sad. It really hurt. That was the beginning of prompting, like, what is it about me that gets lost? And actually, there was a place where there were 2 videographers and 2 people photographing still pictures at a conference, 3 days. And we were in Asia, Manila. And at the end of the 4-day time together, actually it's 4 days, there's before and after candid shots, there was this 3-minute video. And, I realized about halfway through, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to be in it. And, but then, it was hurting so much. I was primed with that sense of invisibility. But then I heard like, oh no, this in the voice in my heart, I thought, this is really good because now Dan's really going to get it. It is so visible. He will understand what I've been saying. And so I think that really, even though it was very hurtful, it was the beginning of growth for me and care from Jesus.
Yeah. And so the care from Jesus, if I'm hearing you right, came initially with this felt sense in your body of, I am not being seen.
Yes. And I had a girlfriend who would always say, when you really feel something, just don't push it down. You even get up from the table and go into the bathroom and just say, Jesus, I hate this. I hate what's happening. And so actually, I put that into practice, which was bold on my part because, again, I'm pretty used to just being quiet and unobtrusive. So to say, excuse me, and leave a group, that was somewhat empowering.
Yes. And so you become aware of you being missed.
Mm-hmm.
And you become aware that this might have something to do with your story.
Yes, I think so. But I hadn't quite gotten there. I'm just like, what is it about me? That I didn't know how to really crack that open.
So how did you begin to connect your experience in the present of being missed, of being invisible, of being hidden in plain sight? How did you begin to connect that to your story growing up?
Well, growing up, I kind of felt like this ninja that would get out of my parents' way, because a lot of times if you're in their way, you have to do something. Or if you say something that bothers them, then there's a problem too. So I think I just did this so naturally.
Yes.
And being a middle child actually helped also to attune that skill.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's do this. Let's jump into your story because you're actually stepping into a part of the book that I want to quote and reflect on in a minute. But I want to start with the preface because, you have a preface. So all books have prefaces, but I love your preface because in your preface, this is a sentence. You say, "My hope for you," you're talking to the reader, "My hope for you as you listen to the stories in this book." So your book it's an anthology of stories
Yes.
from your life. And you say, "My hope for you as you listen to the stories in this book is that you will learn to recognize the voice of your own stories. Listen to your stories and learn from them." And I love that idea of our stories having a voice. It's as if the stories of our lives, the stories that we remember in full or in part, oftentimes it's only snippets, but that they're calling to us, that they have something to say to us.
Yes.
And really what we could say is that the younger boy or girl in the story has something to say to us.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Say some more about that. I mean, you're nodding. This is what I heard as your invitation in the preface.
Oh, totally. I mean, my desire is that the person reading the stories, that will enlighten them to think of their own story, that will quicken their thoughts about different stories. And in that, they'll have a kindness to remember and to take time. I think mindfulness is such a big word out there today, and we're rushing all the time. We're so busy. And so to hear your voice, to ponder, and there are some questions after each little chapter that hopefully it's really not about me at all. That's my desire, is that it's about the reader and that they will take time to remember, to hear that younger voice, to tend to the needs of that younger part of them when they were missed or when they were hurt, and to work that through, to spend some time. We know that there's healing and wellness that comes from remembering and from writing. And that came from this professor, Dr. Pennebaker, in 1997 at the University of Texas in Austin. And he had 3 groups. One group wrote about a difficult situation just for 20 minutes. Another, a happy situation. A third, it didn't even matter. But that first group that wrote and didn't even have any feedback about it, that group actually stayed significantly healthier, and which is astounding how that affected their health, just taking time to write.
Yes. And so in the writing, we are letting our stories have a voice.
Yes, yes.
What in your mind does it mean to let our stories have a voice? What are you inviting the reader to with regard to, so if somebody reads it and they sit down and the questions at the back of each chapter they're specific invitations to basically let your stories have a voice. Say more about how can I let my story have a voice?
Well, I think you have to have a tender heart. And I think you have to have time. I was just hiking with 2 friends who both have very, very sad situations with members of their family, either death or health problems. And the tendency is to not go there, like guard your heart in a sense of, no, well, this happens. Oh, well, but it's all right. And when you actually attune yourself to a situation that's filled with sorrow, I think it kind of goes against the grain of our society in some ways. We need to have that desire to ponder.
And pondering is countercultural in two ways. Pondering sorrow is countercultural. Like, we live in a culture where we don't reflect on grief, on sorrow, on pain. Mm-hmm. But it's also countercultural in the sense of taking time, as you're pointing out. Like, we move so fast.
So fast.
And if I'm going to let my stories have a voice, I'm going to have to spend some time with the younger me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to carve that out. Yeah, you have to, like, for me, I'm like, okay, I'm a human being. Hey, I'm going to make a point to go lie on the hammock 5 minutes every day. Do you know how hard that is? But we need to remember, well, I'm a human being. What might I do? We rush. We're trying to get too much done.
So in the introduction, so we're making our way through the book with the preface. Now in the introduction, I mean, in my mind, it's worth the price of the book. It's only 3 pages long, but you name something in the introduction that I think is a real profound invitation to the reader. And I'm going to just summarize it, and then we're just going to linger with it. Here's how I would summarize what you say. First, you name the harm of your mother without excuses. Mom did this. It's true. It happened. You name it. You put it in black and white. Second, though, you link your style of relating as an adult to how you learn to relate around your mother. And you've already put some language to that, the notion of invisibility, the notion of getting out of the way. So for you, getting out of the way, being invisible, not taking up space became a way of being in the world. But then third, and this is where I just put the book down when I read it. You confess that there remain parts of you that long to hear your mother say, Becky, you're precious to me and I love you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
What I want to do is, I summarized it, but I just want to read your words. And it's a paragraph. And here's what you say. You say, I love my mother, but she was never a safe person. She was an impatient woman who belittled and yelled at my sister and brother and me. She was like a perfectionistic Martha Stewart, but with an unstable psyche. There were consequences to inconveniencing her, so I learned to stay out of her way and be as invisible as possible. When I developed asthma as a 10-year-old and could not breathe, it seemed safer to gasp for air and pass out on my bedroom floor than to cry out for help. I was committed to not bothering her. Life felt much safer that way. So can you say more about being as invisible as possible? What did that look like for you as a girl, as a teenager?
I think I expected perfection out of myself because I think that's what I received from my mother. I wanted to please her. I was a quiet person, so I was never someone that would speak up in class. And I think that goes back to the high, even worthiness too, I guess, or I didn't feel like I was bright enough or knew the answers right. I remember as a young child waiting to be picked up after swimming lessons, and I couldn't make it across the monkey bars. And finally, 2 mothers noticed me and pried my fingers off the bar. And I think I was about 4, which makes me wonder, how was that stifled at such a young age? Once I was a mother and raising children, I think that's too, you kind of see the world through their eyes. And then you start wondering, whoa, my girls would have just hollered for help, right? But why didn't I?
Yeah. I mean, the question about crying out, reaching out, there's nothing more hardwired into the human brain than the reach. And when you had asthma, you did not reach out for help. Not on your radar, not an option, not a menu option for you.
Yeah, which only caused more inconvenience. Yeah.
And the immense loneliness of that bind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an important sentence, this sense of mom is not safe. But as your writing continues, and here's where I just want to spend a little time, you confess so beautifully, you say this sentence, many younger parts of me still long to hear my mother say, Becky, you are precious to me and I love you. This just feels holy to me. You have not killed your desire for your mother's blessing. And so in the introduction, you name her failure without excuses, but you also name your desire for her blessing, for her presence, for her words, for her eyes seeing you, for her attunement. Mm-hmm. So say a little bit, how have you managed to preserve the longing of that girl to be loved well by her mother?
Well, to me, it just seems so easy because I feel like God gave me my parents and I did love them, and I love them even more now that they're not here. And I feel like I'm understanding them more too now that they're not here, probably because I've been tending to myself and my story. And certainly I knew they had hardships. And I think it took me a long time to actually kind of contain, this is my mother, but I'm going to put her aside so that I can actually look at her without feeling sad for her that she lived in the Depression as a child. Her brothers went to an orphanage. Her dad died, blah, blah, blah. Because I grew up with those stories every night at the dinner table. That was something that I couldn't do right away. But once I set them aside and had my own thoughts, but also the caring thoughts of a group to hear without my defense on their part, because I think I defended them, and I still do at times, yes. But that was important to just hey, let's just focus on me.
And one of the things that feels really important is that in the midst of the heartache, as you began to become more aware of how your mom had failed you or your dad had failed you, the tendency as we engage our story and become aware of our parents' failures more deeply, the tendency is to have a posture of, I didn't get what I needed from my mom and dad, and I'm never going to get it. Mm-hmm. And the tendency is therefore to kill the desire.
Yes. Well, maybe that's because my parents weren't living, that I didn't have to go, I'm never going to get it, and be hardened. That would be that would have been so different.
When we deaden that desire, the word deaden is appropriate. Something in us dies.
Yes, yes.
And as I read your introduction, that desire in me grew.
Oh, hooray. Hallelujah. That's my hope.
But what I want to kind of like shine a light on is find some more. Can you find more words for, and I know you're saying it just came naturally to you, and I believe you, but it says something about who you are as a woman that you did not kill your desire for your mother.
Well, I might have been cynical, when she was living. Like I might have I'll never get that from her. But I think I was still always trying to get it. It must. Yes. But yeah, I mean, it's just part of being a daughter, I think.
And your longing for your mother's blessing, my sense as I read the book was that it's grown for you.
Yeah. Thank you. I wasn't even aware of that, but yes, because I think my love grows for them. And so therefore my longing of blessing grows also.
A few pages later, you share that you've come to a place of forgiveness for your parents. And then you say a sentence that I think is really quite provocative. And this is what you say. You say, acknowledging the harmful behavior of my parents did not lessen my love for them. In fact, I think I love my parents more today than ever before. Now, let's flesh this out, because many of us, so many of my clients and myself struggle with this sense of, if I take an honest look at how my parents have harmed me, It's not, I'm not honoring them, and I'm not being very loving towards them. And it's going to create divide, and it's going to shrink my heart rather than make my heart more loving. And you are saying the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what did the process look like for you, Becky, of acknowledging the harmful behavior of your parents and watching and I know it took time, but watching your love for them grow? What did that look like for you?
Well, first, it makes me go to a group I was in. I was in 3 different groups, and that was helpful to have a safe group where you had a facilitator who understood like how to kind of manage, where we could rest knowing we had a good leader there, a shepherd of a sense. And then the women and the people, I was in mixed groups always, and to see their affect as I would tell a story. Oh my gosh, it was like this wellspring of life inside of me that I didn't even know was possible. I didn't even know that telling with eyes and people listening and their expressions to you, and then later their words to you, it totally changed my life. It changed my life, and that's why I'm so excited about group work. It is the best.
Yeah, so let's slow this down. I assume these groups are at the Allender Center, yes?
Well, the first one was at Open Hearts Ministry, and I was quite, I didn't want to go. I kept getting invited. I didn't want to go. I kept saying to the people in charge, like, I'm an educator. I'm not a counselor. Quit it. These emails kept coming. So finally, it was like, I asked a friend, I said, hey, you want to go? Why don't you get on their website? Call me back if you want to go. And I'm like, because I'm not going alone. That's just not who I am. So she calls back and she says, hey, Becky, yes. So we went like 6th graders who had an attitude. But by the 3rd group time, I was in. I was totally in. It's like, then I went for it. Like, yes.
And what I'm hearing a moment ago was that it was the responses to the listeners of your stories,
yes,
that began to shift something in you.
It did. I felt safe telling my story and having care. It's the best. I was changed.
The reason I want to just linger here is you're really talking about, and you talk about it in the book, you're talking about the process of how the human heart begins to heal, and the components of that process that you're putting language to. It's not the only way the human heart heals, but one of the ways is being in a group with people that have done their own work, mm-hmm. and that have the courage and the artistry to engage your story that you are telling that day, and to let you know how it's affecting them.
Yes, yes. And then in that telling, you realize, whoa, I've had this sadness about that particular story for so many years. Not that I've thought about it all the time, but it's there. And it's like, there's no shame. You're like, oh, well, that's over with. And wow, it's like the enemy does not win.
Something about the kingdom of darkness and how evil has us bound to shame begins to unravel and loosen in group contexts.
Oh, yes. And you hear their stories and you're kind of really with them, but a little bit you're like, oh, me too. You start seeing the commonality of humanity and you're like, dang, I'm going to live free. There's more. There's a different way.
And so in the midst of group processes, when they are well facilitated, desire for freedom begins to grow.
Oh my gosh, it's catching. It's like, yes. It just brings life.
Yeah, and it can't grow without hope.
Yes, right.
So what was it about those 3 groups that began to make you hope?
Yeah, once I got rid of that attitude of I was above this or didn't need this, yeah, my heart was just opened. I felt, yeah, I was engaged with other people's stories. I was engaged with the matters of the heart that I must have put armor around in a way without realizing. And this was like, no, just come on, you know, be truthful, be true to your heart. And sometimes that's hard because we don't know what's true to our heart.
Right. And so the responses of the other people in the group help us get clear about what's true in our hearts.
Oh, it's so true. Yes. They help us see what we cannot see.
And I say this all the time on this podcast, but I can't help but reiterate it. This is because we are created in the image of a triune God, a we and not an I. We are built to need the faces and voices of others.
Yes. It's amazing. It's a community. Like, we're called to be with people, but a lot of times being with people doesn't feel so good, even at church. So I have found group work to be the closest presence of holiness that I've ever had.
Yes. So let's shift gears a little bit, not much, because I want to talk about envy. But the reason it's not shifting gears a lot is because my first experience with the paragraph I'm about to read was not when I read your book. Somebody emailed it to me 6 months before I even had your book, because I was confessing to them my envy in a group, like you're talking about, in a group at the Allender Center, where I found myself envying how skillful some of the other group members were at engaging other people's stories. And so I reached out for some prayer and just help with someone else who's a facilitator of these groups. And she wrote me back, and she just quoted a paragraph from your book, and I want to read it because it's about envy. And it just was so helpful to me. And this is what you say. You say, I know that most people think envy is rather easily resolved by being grateful for what we have rather than wishing for what we don't have. Makes sense. And you say, I agree, but not wholeheartedly. Indeed, we are to be grateful for what we have been given. But I think the anguish of envy is better addressed by fully experiencing the loss of what we desperately long for, but don't have. I need to understand that my envy, I love this, my envy disguises an ache so deep that merely to dismiss it is to deny the holiness of a God-given desire. So I want to read the sentence again and ask you just to talk more about it. You say that the anguish of envy is better addressed by fully experiencing the loss of what we desperately long for but don't have. Flesh that out.
I think when I was writing that, it was in remembering wanting to get pregnant and not being able to. And I think I just, I was envious of people who had more children than I had. I mean, it was pretty deep and sick and it wasn't until I could sit with just the situation and feel sad for the difficulty that my husband and I were in with infertility. I needed to that's worth not shoving away but also often I forget to have that tenderness to myself. It's just not an incident that happened a long time ago.
But your sentence that envy disguises the aching places in our hearts, that was so helpful for me, because when we become aware of our envy, I mean, it's just awful because it eats at you and then you feel shame for being envious. But you're inviting us, as I read it, you invited me that day to a completely different way of responding to my envy. And the invitation was, Adam, will you name the ache here? Mm-hmm. And if you will you engage it and grieve it?
Yeah. Were you able to do that?
I was able to do that.
Oh, I'm so grateful. Yeah. It's sad and it's hard. We don't want to do that. It hurts.
It does. And so when you were reflecting on your difficulty getting pregnant and your awareness of what was helpful for me is you're linking the envy of other women who have children with your grief and sorrow and ache, which is really linking it to your longing.
Yes.
In that case, you're longing for children, which is a beautiful longing.
Right. Yeah.
And when we're able to name and bless the beauty of the longing, that combats the shame.
That's right. That's right. That's good, Adam. Absolutely.
And that's what I read in your writing that was freeing for me. And it gave me a way to move. Like it gave me a way to respond to the envy, because envy is such a dead end street, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, we don't want to do that, but we do that.
Okay. A significant chunk of your book talks about your work on the streets of Seattle, caring for women who are being sexually exploited. There are many stories about that. And we can't really end the interview without talking about these women because they figure so prominently in your book.
Yes.
And yet, as I prepared for today and read those sections, I don't know how to speak about something as complex, dark, and overwhelming as what you were giving us a window into that's happening on the streets of Seattle and so many streets in this country, in this world. So I'm going to let your words take us there, because at the very end of the book, after you've shared numerous stories about your work with women caught in prostitution, you say this, and you're trying to make sense of what you've witnessed. And you say this, you say, I look for wisdom that makes sense, but I haven't been able, through my wisdom or the wisdom of the ages, to describe the unutterable or to utter the indescribable. And I love that sentence. What do you mean, Becky, when you say that you, as you reflect, as you try and put words to paper, to your experience, that you haven't been able to describe the unutterable or utter the indescribable?
Well, that's a big one. I just think my experience being out there until 2:30 in the morning, 9:30 to 2:30, and coming to love particular women, and then when you don't see them, you're like sad, but you're wait, we're glad that they're not on the street tonight. You don't know if you'll see them again. And then to worry about them and just to identify them like, wow, that could have been me. That easily could have been me if I had had different parents or a different situation. It's just like wringing out your heart, because you realize that we are all alike. We all have the same desires. A lot of these women had children and babies and fathers that took their children to look at Christmas lights. I mean, like I'm no better than them. There's no sense of higher or lower. We are one.
Right.
And I was sad for them.
Yeah. And yet what I loved about your words is that you're confessing that there really are no words to describe why this is happening, how this can be happening, and really what they are enduring night after night, and what you bore witness to some nights.
Whether it's violence, we only had to pack up our little coffee stand and pass out mittens and gloves, and they just endured so much violence. You'd see them run across a highway with 5-inch high heels on, because that's what they had to wear in the cold of the winter, and their behind was showing. They couldn't even wear underwear, and they couldn't even choose what they wore. I mean, I can't quit talking once I stop, but none of it can to say what really is going on.
Yeah. And you end the paragraph by saying a sentence that it's an allusion to Jeremiah, but it's a great sentence that clearly came from you. And it's, I had to speak or the fire inside would burn.
Yeah. I had that calling for that year, that season.
What was the fire inside that compelled you to the streets?
Well, love. And also we've had a heart for people who have been sexually abused, which probably that's every human being on the earth. And also, I feel like this, the doors opened for me to be a part of this ministry. And so I wanted my church ladies, my people in the church to know what goes on as they're sleeping. I wanted to give pictures to that. I really wanted to make that clear.
Right. So in that sense, you're a prophet.
Wow. Thank you. I never thought of it that way.
Well, if I heard you right, you wanted to tell the truth.
Yes. Oh, yes. Come on, people.
And part of the fire was you wanted to tell the truth about a truth that was hidden.
Yeah.
Which I just think is beautifully ironic, given...
Yeah, I hadn't even put that together.
I mean, not only given the title of your book, but given your story. You go from a girl who is forced to hide to a prophet who is telling the truth about other people in hiding.
Wow. Thank you, Adam.
Last chapter that I want to talk about is called Bearing Witness. And in that story, you talk about a woman named Queen who you met on the streets at night. And this is what you say. You say, Queen and I were different and yet so alike. I'm grateful that I don't work the streets, but if my circumstances 30 years ago had been the same as hers, would I have been so different? And then here's the sentence that I just, and who would have borne witness to my suffering?
Yeah.
There is something about our need to have someone bear witness to our suffering that I think goes to the core of who we are. So can you say more about that question that you just let dangle out there? Who would have borne witness to my suffering? It reminds me of your words earlier about how other people in your three groups bore witness to your suffering.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And that changed you.
It totally changed me.
And you spent a lot of nights on the street bearing witness to women like Queen's suffering. You bore witness to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there has to be value in the kingdom of God merely in bearing witness.
That's stunning.
You end the book with a story of immense heartache for you personally, and you talk about your process of grieving. And then you write, sometimes people ask, why go back to the sad places in your life? It isn't an easy question to answer convincingly when someone believes it is wrong or useless to return to sorrow. And you continue, all I can say is that in sorrow and in the care of wise guides, stories of brokenness become holy as we taste the tears of God. The experience is life-changing. Research even shows that our brains actually change when we tell stories of loss in a safe setting and receive care. So can you say more about that phrase, in sorrow and in the care of wise guides, stories of brokenness become holy and we taste the tears of God?
I think that says it, and I believe it wholeheartedly, that to have an understanding that's clear why we're in this group together. So and then of course there's safety and confidence, but we normally don't have time to talk. I'm so different than going to the grocery store, right? Like there's no chance for that usually at the grocery store. And so to have a time designated to be and speak in a way that's like no other place that I've ever found walking on this planet, to have that desire and the desire for those with you in the time to listen to others and the time to be heard. What happens in our brains and our hearts, minds, and bodies, I don't know, but it's changing. And I can't get enough of it because I've seen redemption and I've seen a newness in myself, in my heart, in my being that allows me to be much more accepting, much more loving to Becky, much more understanding to Becky. It's lowered my anxiety because I had a lot of perfectionism that I put on myself in every area. And that's like That's a huge weight. And I didn't understand the anxiety that I think I was given in my body just by being born, by the parents whom I was born with. And so I'm still learning how to be kind to myself in those anxious moments. And I'm getting kind of a handle on it, like it's okay. I have to talk to myself sometime, but I think anxiety controlled a lot of my life that I didn't even understand or see. I pushed it, it's just me. Well, now I'm more than just me with some of that love and care that I got in these groups.
Yes. And it's almost as if the love and the care that you got from other people in these sacred, holy spaces, these groups, has borne the fruit in your own heart of a renewed kindness to your own, from Becky to Becky.
Yes. If any message probably that I want to be my message is to be kind. Be kind to yourself. I think we can be kind to others, but man, we can just slice and dice ourselves, and we can do it so seamlessly for decades that we're not even aware, of the cruelty that we speak in our heart to ourselves.
And so in the quote that I read, there are really two parts to it. You said in sorrow. So part one is you're inviting us to enter sorrow. But then part two is, and in the care of wise guides. What I know is that when we enter sorrow without the care of wise guides, it can be very fraught territory that often leads to a sense of aloneness.
Yes.
I think it can be good to grieve alone, but doing it in the care of wise guides is a truly transformative experience. Mm-hmm. Any sense of why that was for you? Why did you need the combo of sorrow in the presence of the wise guides?
Well, I think the wise guides are just what they are. They've done this work that you are doing currently in a group, and they've spent a lot of time and training to know how to go the right direction, so to speak. So, I mean, the obvious is the obvious, and there's a lot of times we can't see what's not the obvious. And I think that's what a guide does. It helps you go around the other flank that you weren't even focusing on, and then, to be careful, because I would, you got to be careful what group you sign up to go to.
Indeed. And I can bear witness, just on a personal note, that a group process, which, let's be honest, it's a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, right. Yes.
But the return on investment, if you show up and if you let your heart receive the faces and voices of other people, it truly changes the brain. I've seen it happen. And the hope that emerges as that's happening, I mean, it'll make you believe in the resurrection.
Yes, that's right. It does.
So, Becky, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for your generosity of spirit just in reflecting tonight or today on your words in your book and the stories that made this book. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure also to be invited to do this with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want more from Becky, you can purchase her book, Hidden in Plain Sight, from Amazon or wherever you get books. And remember, if you want to get the next episode as soon as it is released, please download the Place We Find Ourselves app and support the podcast by paying $2.99 per month. Instructions are on my website. Have a great couple of weeks, everybody.